Welcome to Damstra Safety Risk Assessment WHS. My name is Ruth and I'm a trainer at Damstra Technology. And today I'm going to show you where to configure the module settings and an overview of the functionality. If you are interested in accessing Damstra Academy for training videos, then please email service@damstratechnology.com. Attention the training team. Prakash will put that email address in the chat for you. The new Risk Assessment WHS is accessed through your Risk module, and you can see that Risk Assessment WHS has been enabled. And when Risk Assessment WHS is enabled, the old Risk Assessment in your module will turn to Risk Assessment Standard. So the new Risk Assessment WHS module is independent from the old Risk Assessment, and it enables the safety users to capture and track risk assessments, but also provides extra functionality, such as user customizable organizational language, more details for the risk assessment, and if we were to have a look at one of these, actions, edit. You will see that our description is not just a subject anymore. You could have a task or an area assessed. And if you hover over these circles, it will give you more description of what should be in the field. And as we scroll down, we can have applicable to a site or the visibility, a project name, allocations, who's leading the risk assessment, any custom tags, and any photos. So that was the first tab, the description. The second tab may look a little daunting, but it's very much like a JSA with our step number, any hazards, our hazard category and subcategory, our rating before controls, current controls, our final rating, and any possible future controls. So these are all step numbers, activities, or tasks to do with the description, as in standard risk assessment for the store. You can use risk assessment WHS in cases where you've got uncertainty about how the steps of a task or hazard can cause injury, when the work involves several hazards, such as in here, several hazards, or when there are new tasks, equipment, or changes to the workplace. So to create a new risk assessment WHS, we come over here, we could add a new risk assessment and start off with a clean slate. Go back to risk assessment. If we had some in here, we could go actions and we could copy a risk assessment. Or we could add a risk assessment built on a common risk. So we would add our common risk in first, and if we didn't know which common risk assessment there was, I can click in here and I can press the space bar. Everywhere you see something from a drop-down list and you don't really know what you're looking for, just press the space bar. And you can see that our work alone risk assessment is a common risk. If I go back to the register, you can see that common risks are the ones in bold pink. It's a common risk assessment. So that was a little bit about the risk assessment, how it looks like in the module. But what I'm going to go through now is the settings. So risk assessment WHS, I'm going to go up to the settings. And the first thing we've got to do is have it enabled. So with it enabled, I'm going to go to users, user group profile, actions, edit my group access. And the first thing I want to switch on into settings is what is called locations. So any new feature that comes into your Damstra Safety module will come in disabled. So I want to enable locations, and under general, I want to enable language, security, custom tags, or anything else that you've missed over the last couple of months that hasn't been enabled, but in particular, custom tags. And then if I scroll down and I open up the risk, I want to ensure that all of these are W for read write. If I scroll down a little bit more into our risk, I need to ensure that risk assessment WHS is enabled. So that was for the edit user group access ABC admin. So I'm going to enable all of that for my group access. What this means is that as a super user, you don't have to switch on this module for all of your users or your user groups. Cancel that. That means over here, you could have your old risk assessment standard and your risk assessment WHS running side by side for your user group, whereas everybody else is still entering risk through risk assessment standard. I'm sorry about that if you have done a lot of work in your risk assessment standard. It's a whole different way of looking at hazards and risks, and all of this is not transferable into the other module. It's a separate module. So going back to the settings for risk assessment WHS, and we come down here to risk. These are the settings that go with the modules down here. The first one I want to look at is what's called risk categories. And in risk categories, you'll see that in yours, without it enabled, you'll have risk assessment standard with categories and subcategories. Once this new module is turned on, you will have categories and subcategories for both of them. If I was to look at the categories for risk assessment standard, such as site, with the subcategories in here, and I go to the categories for plant equipment vehicles, the subcategories will already be populated for you. And these were designed by a company that used the latest standards for categories and subcategories. So you might not have to change much there. Ergonomic, manual task, our subcategories are all in here. But of course, if you found that you needed something else for your company or your business, you can always shoot over here. You could add a new subcategory, edit a category, or delete a subcategory. But if you were to get risk assessment WHS turned on in your system, this would all be populated. If they aren't populated, please email the service desk and get them all switched on for you. The next thing I want to look at is in settings, the organizational language. And in our organizational language, we can rename our JSA or our SWIMS module to whatever we want. And you'll see that will be over here, renaming the JSA or SWIMS. You might call them JSEAs or SOPs or SWIMS or anything like that. Your SOP module. And here we have our risk ratings before controls, rating before controls, or with existing controls, rating with current controls. With planned controls is not used in this risk module. So if you had standard language for your company, what they recognized before controls or raw risk and residual risk, you can always change them in your organizational language. The next setting that you'd have to look at was which will be called risk management. We're stored in here in risk and risk management. And in risk management, there is a column that you can just choose whether to display these optional fields for all users of the modules. So this assumptions allows you to enter any assumptions that are relevant to the risk assessment. And sometimes I get a little bit confused whether the tick means I'm hiding it or showing it. So I'll just shoot up here and I'll go, checked is show the field, unchecked, hide the field. All right, hide the field. I think in risk assessment WHS, the subcategory, you can't change that because that's a mandatory field, but we should have completed by and our custom tags. If you wanted to make it easy for when you start using risk assessment WHS, I suggest that you just have these two turned on And when you get more used to it, or you find that you need to report some more things, you can go back into your settings, risk management, and turn the rest on. In settings, the next one we want to have a look at that affects your new module is called risk score matrix settings. We have our likelihood and consequence is not changing. Where our changes are in category. So what's changed with your new module being enabled is we have some more columns over here. And this is something that we absolutely love with our new module as opposed to the old module. Because you'll remember that when we put with our residual risk or our risk after controls and we needed to do a review, it would default to 12 months. And as health and safety people know, defaulting to 12 months doesn't work for all those residual risks. So if I was to scroll down here, we can also see which of our residual risk score would make up our critical risk, or a critical hazard or critical risk. What are those risks that could hurt someone the most or hurt a lot of people or cause the most damage? That would be a critical risk. And in the health and safety world, where there's not many resources, this critical risk is where we should be plowing most of our resources into to reduce that residual critical risk. So if I was to have a residual risk, that means the risk after I've added all my controls is still very high, then I'd want to review those controls every month. If my residual risk was in the orange or very high, I would review those controls every 3 months. And as we go down our residual risk with reducing our risk, we might review those controls every 6 months, 12 months, or 12 months as well. That means that it will default for your review period and send you a notification or escalation that those controls need to be reviewed. But of course, within the system, you can override them if you've got a one-off or you need to review something ad hoc. You can do that as well. In our score matrix, nothing is changing here. We've still got our risk score matrix, but in our impacts, we will see we've got a new field called default for risk assessment. That means what is the category of impact that my risk has it on. And if I was to scroll down here, mostly you would leave it at safety because this is a health and safety management system. We could have the default as the impact on our safety. However, if you wanted to add some public relations or you are product orientated, environment or business operation, we could do business operation. If I was to go over here, go actions, edit, and I made that the default, you'll see that the default for risk assessment has gone off safety and onto business operation. You can only have one default. I'll shoot back and make safety our default for risk assessment. And we'll see when we're adding a risk assessment later on how that impacts. Our next tab would be our hints. And in our hints, our category, we'll put it to safety. This is where, when you're adding a risk assessment, you can give someone a hint on what score they're to use, such as if safety, likelihood, and the type was rare, you might type in there, not likely to happen ever you could put under 2% ever happened before. And the consequence being insignificant, on your safety you may put minor injury treated with first aid. These are the hints that you put in. And then put all the hints for the rest of the types under likelihood and consequence. And of course, our hierarchy of controls is we can edit this as well, the elimination, substitution, isolation, and our hierarchy of controls. So that's about updates to your risk score matrix settings. So this module also allows you to see a summary of how your critical hazards are managed. So as I said, if you ticked that a residual risk rating was between 16 and 25, you can focus on your highest risk rating. Back in my settings, under General, you'll see that I turned on custom tags. So custom tags, under Settings, Custom Tags, it's very easy just to add a custom tag, such as, say, store risk. And the area is under Risk Assessment. Save that tag. So these custom tags are a very good way of filtering for your critical risks, your public liability, any lone workers, any operational risks. So that was just custom tags. So you might create a series of risk assessments, say related to a specific group, and you can set up these groups by creating group names as custom tags. I might add, because my friend Peter is here, I might go offshore. Or onshore. So it was very easy just to add. And of course, if I didn't want that one there, actions, edit or delete it. When I talked before about when a new risk was being added to the risk register or things like that, you can create an email alert when a new risk is added. So while I'm in settings, I'll go settings, general, notifications and escalations. I'm going to add, actions, edit. I'm going to add a trigger that the trigger type, and here's our new one here, risk assessment WHS, is that a risk assessment was added with site risk register ticked or not ticked. And I could have both of them and save. And of course, save that. That was a little bit about the settings with risk, with our risk classes, risk control plan, and all of those that relate specifically to risk assessment WHS. Let's head over to the module and see if we can add one here. Go risk assessment WHS. As I said before, I could go actions, copy. I could add a new one or add a common risk or add another risk based on a common risk. You'll see here I've got this called hazard accountability, and this is a fantastic new feature to make life easier for you. If I was to click on hazard accountability, and you'll see there's all our categories and subcategories. And if I wanted to say, look for a category, anything to do with fall, if I go fall, and my falling objects fall greater are subcategories. If I was to go slip, our physical environment is our category and our subcategory uneven sloping ground. Now what this does in this hazard accountability means that I could add the control measures in hazard accountability. I go actions and edit. You'll see that my suggested controls, I've already added them. Good lighting, clean as you go, wet floor, doormats, staff wear sensible shoes. I could also add in here another suggested control for uneven sloping slippery ground is firm grip. And that control type might be just administrative, and save and close or save and add another one. So I'll save that. back in my risk assessment WHS, I can export my risk assessment WHS register, and that will go to an Excel spreadsheet. My critical hazard summary, all my hazard details. And those all go to an Excel spreadsheet that you could edit or do your conditional formatting in. Over here on the left-hand side, I've got my filters where I could look at my active ones, my archived ones, my ones. I could include common or only show common risks or exclude that common risk if I had a whole heap in here and click apply. Any significant hazards or just look at my hazard categories. My locations or any custom tags. This is where I added those custom tags. So if I had a whole heap of risks, I could look for those custom tags. You know, I could just press my space bar. I just want the ones that are critical risks and save that. And apply. And once I've done all my filters, I could rename this filter. I could go, this is my critical, save this filter critical risk one and save that. And that will appear up here with your filters. Let's go ahead and add a risk. I'm going to add a new risk, and my risk would be, I'm going to put delivering and my site visibility would be, I'll go from Botany Downs Copper Mill, and my assessment stage is not started as of today. So I'll save that risk assessment. And this is where it opens up with the rest of my description and details. It's not a common risk. Got my risk ID is automatically populated. My subject or my task is deliver boxes to our other store with our description. Not start as of today. And the project, we could add project is not a mandatory field. Only those ones with those little asterisks are mandatory fields. And my location, that's what I could be set up in my location in the settings that we had turned on. My location could be my retail store, the shop floor, the warehouse. So I'll choose warehouse. My specific location, I'll put first store. Risk assessment lead is me. Any custom tags is, of course, the store risk, and any photos. I could drop them in and save my risk assessment. Let's shoot up to the top and add our assessment and controls. I'm going to come over here and add an activity task. And this task would be the first task I would have to do to deliver boxes to our other store. So in my assessment and controls, I'm going to add an activity task, and my step number, I'm going to call it 1. A little dash, and my step number would probably be to load boxes onto delivery truck. And my activity task, such as now in our hazard, what is the hazard? Well, what is the risk here? So I think my hazard is going to be lifting. So my hazard be risk of strain sprain from repetitive lifting. And my hazard category or subcategory, choose it would be economic manual task. And you'll see those categories and subcategories that we saw in settings are going to populate. So I can go, it could be load, heavy, awkward. Actually, I'm going to be movement, repetitive, twisting. And those impact, we had that set up as default, and the default being safety. And here's where we go select our risk score. What I love about this one the most is when I select the risk score, I'm going to ask myself, here's our hint that we put in before. So if you wanted the person to have a hint on what to choose, it would be what we put in that risk score matrix settings, those impact hints. So I'll ask myself the question, with no controls in place, probably not even common sense, how likely is it that a person is going to suffer a strain or sprain by lifting boxes onto the truck or delivering the boxes? Well, it's probably likely. Then I ask myself the question, if that person were to injure themselves lifting those boxes, how bad could that injury be? And this is with your hints. I think it's going to be, could be a serious permanent injury. So now I'm going to have likely, serious, I'm going to choose high. Save that risk score. So now that I know that I've got a risk of strain sprain from repetitive lifting, and it's likely and it could be quite major, my rating before controls is going to be high. So let's add a control measure. And the control measure could be 2-person lift or boxes over 20 kilograms. And my control type is going to be administrative, and save that. There's my current control there. Do you remember not so long ago I put that hazard accountability with ergonomic manual task repetitive moving? You'll see here that suggest controls is not grayed out. So if I was to click suggest controls, what I put in the background in my settings under the hazard accountability can pop up here. So if you had a heap of controls that you normally use, you can go staff trained to blah, oh yes, I'll add that one. Staff to blah, blah, staff, blah, yeah, I'll add that one. Makes it really easy, records being added. And now we've added our current controls. I could manually add more controls, or I could look at all the suggested controls. So now that I've got all these controls in place, I'm going to select my risk score for after those controls. And I'm going to ask myself, with all the controls in place that I put in, how likely is it that someone's going to get a strain or sprain from repetitive injuries? Well, I'm going to say it's still possible. Okay, it's still possible. And with all controls in place, if a person was to get a strain or sprain, how bad could that be? So what's happened here with all my controls, I've reduced the likelihood of it, but unless I wrapped them up in cotton wool and had back braces on everyone and had a whole team lifting boxes, then I haven't actually reduced the consequence. So you need to remember in your risk controls or your suggested controls, I need to find something to mitigate the likelihood, and I need to find something to mitigate or reduce the consequence. So now I said with all my controls in place, I'm going to say that it's still possible that someone will get a strain, and it still could be quite serious. So I'll choose 9 and save that risk score. I could suggest possible future controls, and I'll add a future control, load boxes, take boxes, risk of strain. we could have purchase AI robots to load the trucks, and a control type would be engineering, and the person responsible could be Tim. And by the 20th of July, action required, I'll say. And this possible control is pending management approval. So the status is going to be pending, and I'm going to save that for future control. From here, I could save and close. I could add another hazard to do with that loading the trucks, or add a new activity task. So if I save and add another hazard, could be the hazard, could be in the hazard category, I'm going to type in slip. And our physical environment, uneven, sloping, slippery ground. Select my risk score, and it's probably likely with minor injury. Save that risk, and I'm going to add all my suggested controls. Firm grip while carrying boxes, staff wear sensible shoes, good lighting, shop floor, I don't need that one, wet warning, floor in good condition, and close that. So now I've added all my controls. Select my risk score. So now it's unlikely, but it could still be minor injury, and save that, save and close. So now you'll see with our step number and activity task, I've got hazards, and I could have added those hazards under one, my current controls, my approved future controls, and management actions. And I could notify management of actions to implement approved future controls. Notify. From here, I could add another activity or task. It would be number 2, or go to the next tab, which would be related. And it's not who this is related to. What we can do is we can relate this task or this hazard to, we could add it to maybe a JSA or swims that we have called forklift operation, and save that related. And in our reviews, our next review, I'm going to add a review today. And the status is completed. Save that review. And our next review would be probably in 6 months. And I'll save that risk assessment. So here's my risk assessment, deliver boxes to the other store, with my rating before controls, my rating with controls, and I have a future control pending, and my next review date. As you know, anything in red, the date is in red, it means it's overdue. Anything is yellow is due this month, and anything not highlighted is a future control. From here, I'll export my risk assessment and open that up in an Excel spreadsheet. And I noticed it hasn't got much text wrapping in here, but you can see there's my unloading delivery trucks, deliver boxes to our other store, our ID, not started the assessment stage, got 1 pending approval, and our next review date. Let's have a look at one that's going to be printed out. So if I was to have a look at, and I'll print this one. So that was using the print on the right-hand side of the risk assessment. I'll wait till that loads. So again, with these, I could view them, edit them, print them, copy them, archive them, or delete them. And if we have a look at our risk assessment, unloading, loading trucks, repetitive restraints as a hazard, current controls, impacts causing, our current controls here, doorways, working at height, contacts with bleach, all our chemicals. So what we're doing is adding all the activity tasks, not just the subjects, to that whole, I'm going to find it, the subject, the engineering workshop. For that engineering workshop is the area assessed. To assess the Christchurch engineering workshop, I've added all the risks and hazards for the Christchurch workshop. Rather than back in our old risk assessment, we had drop-down lists of categories and subjects. We can assess a whole area. Say if you owned a store, you could assess the whole store in one risk assessment. Going back to our risk assessment WHS. From here, if you wanted risk assessment WHS, please email service@damstratechnology.com to have it enabled and have your locations enabled. Reach out to your Damstra contact if you want any more information on this. Don't forget that you can have both old risk assessment module and the new one standing side by side. You don't have to have this one. If you're quite happy with the old one, please keep it. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and Prakash and I will get back to you. If no one else has any questions, I'm going to knock it off here, stop the recording. It's been a pleasure presenting to you today. Have 12 minutes back of your hour, and I'll see you in the next webinar. Don't forget we have webinars weekly throughout July, August. Keep looking at that Damstra Technology training page and booking for the next webinars. Otherwise, look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much.